This is Coach Devin, and I'm going to break down footage of a close 12-13 loss that we had versus Campbell during the second and final round of play on Sunday at the Thrilliamsburg Throwdown held in Williamsburg, Virginia. Overall, I saw a lot of promising play from the weekend's footage, even with having minimal offensive structure established so far. Kudos to Coach Adam and Coach Conley who attended. It looks like they had us playing some really good ball overall. Campbell is the type of team that we hope we will beat soundly with good fundamentals and a full squad by spring semester. As you'll see in the game, their strategy is more advanced at this point in the season than ours is. However, they rely heavily upon one specific defensive look, and only a handful of offensive playmakers who appear to have been playing together for a while. First, I want to talk about ultimate from a scoring perspective. When a team is receiving the disc to start a point, they are considered to have the advantage to score, since they begin the point with possession. If the receiving team scores, it's called a hold, similar to other sports. If the receiving team fails to score, that means their opponent necessarily scored, since there are no ties, and the offense has been broken. In that scenario, the pulling team has scored what's called a break. Generally speaking, winning ultimate games comes down to scoring more breaks than your opponent, with one exception. In games where the break count is even, it is possible to win the game by having received during the first point and winning the game on serve. Here, we have a short turnover. It is important to note that not all turnovers are created equal. We want to avoid short field turnovers as they allow the opposition a greater chance of scoring due to the field position following the turnover. That is, they are much closer to the end zone than if we turned it on a long huck. Also, we see here the advantage of running a zone defense. Zone defenses often create chaos in the period of time following a turnover. Campbell gets an easy transition score opportunity by fast breaking following the turnover. Ideally, our entire team should be pointing at matchups following the turnover and protecting the end zone first. That means that when the disc is turned over, it is most important to make sure that no opposing player gets a free run to the end zone uncovered. The score is 0-1 in favor of Campbell as they notch the game's first break. Here, Joe does a good job of catching the pull, using a clap catch and making sure that his body is behind the disc if he mistimes his catch. An occasional mistake that I see our handlers make is that they will try to catch the pull underhanded or overhanded and without their body behind the disc. If we drop a pull, that creates a short field turnover and a golden opportunity for the opposition to break. Here, we do a good job of swinging the disc and finding an open popper down the field. Undercover police officer Danny Blessing takes an overly ambitious shot toward the end zone, which isn't quite good enough versus their defense. Even though we turned it here, I do prefer the long field turnover versus the short field one that we gave up on the prior point. Following the turnover, we played good four-side defense. However, they get a breakthrow off to a strike cut, which leads to a power position huck. Power position simply refers to the fact that the player catching the disc has his forward momentum moving up the field with his mark trailing, leaving him a window of time to throw an unmarked huck. This is among the most dangerous acts in Ultimate, leaving a handler unmarked with momentum and vision down the field. Luckily, their throw is off target and we get the D, despite their attempt at a greatest. A greatest is an attempted throw and catch in one motion, where the offensive player establishes inbounds contact before leaping out of bounds, catching the disc and throwing it back in bounds before landing. Discussion ensues following the greatest attempt about where the disc should come into play. If the offensive player was in bounds before touching the disc should come in at the goal line. If the offensive player was out of bounds, the disc should have come in at the last point in which the disc was over the field of play. Here it looks like we agreed that the player was out of bounds before touching the disc, so the disc comes back in at midfield. On the new possession, IMAX gets a skillful, low, fast flick break through the cup. The opposing team is throwing a style of zone defense, which places 3 players around whomever has the disc, allowing the remaining 4 defenders to guard various portions of the field. The 3 players around the disc are in a formation known as a cup. The cup's job is to contain disc movement and funnel the disc to the sideline, hoping to eventually get a turnover as the offense runs out of field space to work with. A nifty high-release backhand gets us out of trouble, and we utilize a few swings and dump passes to shred the defense. We finish off the point with a nice throw to Bobby. I know a lot happened during this point, but this was just an offensive hold. We still need another break to be able to win this game since they're already up a break. We pull, and they come out in a horizontal stack offense. This offense has 3 handlers spread out across the width of the field, and 4 cutters spread out horizontally located about 15 to 20 yards away from the handlers. Horizontal stack offense is what the Dirty Birds ran most of last spring season, as it opens up throwing lanes and allows for a level of creativity that isn't as readily available in the vertical stack. By virtue of the deep space being available to be taken by any cutter or even handlers at nearly any point during a point, horizontal stack offenses allow teams to attack the end zone aggressively, often from power position hooks. Here, their center handler hits an open side end cut and then follows his own throw by running for the pop-out pass back to him. This short, quick dump pass is sometimes referred to as a dishy. By following his own pass, he creates a sort of power position for himself. As he catches, he has his forward momentum behind him, which will allow him to generate more power on a possible deep throw. Further, his eyes are up, which allows him to survey the field quickly before, during, and after his catch. He ends up throwing a flick hook to a well-timed deep cut for a score. This give-and-go pop-out type movement from handlers is something that we will aspire to do when we begin working on our own H-stack offense later this year. Here, Campbell comes down in zone again, and we move it to the trapped sideline before dump swinging to the other sideline. They're trapping both sidelines, which is an aggressive zone tactic seen even at some of the higher club levels. We wind up utilizing a lot of side-to-side movement, which puts their 3 cup defenders out of position before we find some space in the end zone to tie the game at 2s. This is an offensive hold as we're still down 1 break. This pull doesn't do exactly what Chin wants it to do, but I want to note the hang time. When pulling, it's probably most critical to keep the pull first and foremost in bounds, as pulls that land out of bounds end up at the break mark, 20 yards up the field. Following keeping the pull in bounds, the next most important elements of the pull are the depth of the pull and the hang time. These 2 elements work in tandem, allowing our defense the time and ability to cover the pull, pressure the first pass, and hopefully put the opposing offense in a tough spot to start the point. While Chin's pull doesn't have the distance that we'd hope, it does hang in the air for about 8 seconds, which should be plenty of time for our defenders to run down and cover their matchups. Here, our marks appear to be a little bit flat, meaning it looks like we are trying to deny the huck versus force the disc to one side of the field or the other. Campbell ends up scoring in a few passes, several of which were contested. Here we played decent defense, but our opponent played better offense. They end up holding. Score is now 2-3. Here, Joe catches the pull clap catch style, but you can see his body isn't behind it. It doesn't affect us in this case, but in windier or wetter conditions, this could have easily ended up a dropped pull. We have some really nice swings here, and IMAX goes through the cup. However, we have an unforced turnover at midfield. They score in 2 passes. Their zone D to offensive transition causes chaos for us when we're trying to match up. This is why it's important to A, protect against scoring cuts, and B, point to your person after a turnover, particularly when facing a zone defense and the matchups aren't quite as clear initially. This leads to their second break of the game. Now we have a little bit of a hole to dig ourselves out of. The score is 2-4. They come with a zone defense. We have decent patience on Zone O before a throw goes up toward the middle of the field. Typically, zone defenses will have multiple defenders capable of protecting this part of the field if a lofty throw goes up. We probably want to avoid taking this shot at the expense of either dump swinging, making a short pass through the middle, or making a long pass toward the end zone. Alternatively, hammers and blades from one side of the field to the other can be useful zone-breaking throws. However, we collectively as a team are probably not accurate enough yet with those throws to be looking for that option. Adam gets a D, which earns us the possession back. Logan has an execution error, though he was making a good decision to swing back to the middle of the field. In transition, they get a fast break score from one of their main handlers to their top all-around player. This is their third break of the game, and the score is 2-5. Here, Nips is able to challenge multiple throwing lanes with just a slight change in his stance. You can see he keeps both feet planted, but does a slight pivot from right to left, allowing him a lane to throw what's considered a no-pivot backhand. This particular throw needs to be quick since the thrower is not lunging out and around their mark, rather using the quick release to open up the throwing angle. If Nips doesn't have good lower body mechanics on his throws, that is, if he doesn't have that slight bend to his knees and the ability to step around his mark, this throw isn't an option. Overall, I would prefer his neutral disc holding position to have the top of the disc facing the sky and not turned over facing the ground, as that turned over style of holding the disc introduces extra movement into the throwing motion, not to mention lengthens the thrower's release time. The other thing I want to highlight is that Jamie comes straight behind the thrower for the dump pass here. This is something that we worked on last year, providing trapped throwers with an easy throwing option when we were on the sideline. Jamie coming straight back allows for a reliable release valve, and Jamie does a good job of swinging the disc immediately back toward the middle of the field, away from the trap sideline. Here, Jamie does a good job of creating room to throw a short backhand dump pass by bending at the hips and sticking his butt into his mark. If the mark is able to block this throw, chances would have been good that the mark would have been in illegal marking position, reaching over the top of Jamie's back. Joe does a good job of making a short strike cut in front of the thrower and then curling back into the middle of the field after he doesn't receive the pass. We end up running a textbook dump swing for a score from Ian to Chin. Even though the throw was slightly behind Chin, he does a good job of jumping and clap catching this pass against pressure from his defender. We hold to make the score 3-5, still down a few breaks. I assume that the pull went out of bounds here given where the offense starts with the disc. While we get the D, we have an unforced turnover in the dump set. They fast break to Dan's man, one of their main players, for a hold. We are still down 3 breaks, and the score is 3-6. Here, the pull goes out of bounds. We use a straight back dump and swing. We use quick movement and look good until an unforced turnover. They shoot aggressively toward the end zone and score on a jump ball to their star player. We're now down 4 breaks at half, and the score is 3-7. Out of half, we pull out of bounds. They go throw and go again with their star player before eventually having an unforced turnover, partly due to having 2 of their cutters moving to the same space. Following the turnover, they are matched up in man-to-man defense, putting their star player as a poach in the open side throwing lane. The mark here is forcing Joe backhand, and the open side poach just means that their star player is looking for blocks in the open side lane versus guarding his matchup more tightly. Joe breaks the mark to Jamie, and we have an unforced turnover. I'm going to pause the video here and ask you to predict what you think they might be doing or looking for after the turnover. Here, we do a good job of making sure to deny the initial deep hug, as Joe and Jamie both protect the end zone. Campbell runs a 4-side throw and go, which is open because we're confused in our matchups. Here, Big Mac takes the player that Ian is guarding, effectively leaving open their offensive player, who then acts as a hub for their star to get the disc back. Chin and Jamie both do a good job of reacting to the disc movement defensively. They just squeeze a small window throw into the end zone for the score in the hold. The score is now 3-8. Here we use a straight back dump and swing and quick disc movement through the middle. We get away with a poor throw into a crowd of bodies, but a score is a score. We hold, but we're still down several breaks. The score is 4-8. This is another out of bounds pull by us. As a reminder, the field is 40 yards wide across. If we are throwing long throws regularly outside of practice, we should be able to land our pulls within the field of play on a calm day with little to no wind. Campbell goes with an H-stack with an immediate 4-side handler give and go. Here the mark, in this case Gulker, needs to be on his toes so that when the thrower releases the disc, he can use his body to orbit between the thrower and the receiver, hoping to deny the quick dump pass back to the initial thrower. We can tell that this particular receiver is not a strong thrower, just based off of his unrealistic throw fakes and his poor lower body technique. His knees are not bent in a way that suggests he has fundamental throwing technique, and the rapid succession of backhand fakes indicates that he doesn't have a flick that he trusts. Here, our mark needs to stay sound, not biting on fakes, and all defenders within the immediate vicinity of the thrower should be playing tough disc denial by keeping their body between the thrower and any nearby targets. Here, Ben does a good job of reading the situation, peeling off of his matchup, and helping pressure the throw to Logan's man. Logan picks up, and I want to make a note that he's traveling ever so slightly. We get two good dump swings off, and Ben launches a pretty nice huck to a well-timed cut by Jamie. This throw ideally is a little bit flatter, with less outside-in curve, so that if Ben isn't 100% accurate, there's room for error, and Jamie can run it out. Upon the catch, Jamie does a good job of looking quickly for a dump when there are no viable continuation options. And we score on some simple handler movement involving swings and strike cuts. This is textbook red zone offense, leading to our first break of the game. We now have one break to their 4, and the score is 5-8. Here, we have an inbounds pull by Chin with 7 seconds worth of hang time. This pull is perfect. Our marks are a little weak here, as we're not reacting quickly to their throws. We want to be on the balls of our feet, and we want to be moving our arms. As you play against an offensive player, you will want to understand their tendencies and what they like to do. The mark obviously can't take everything away, but the mark can take away preferred options from the thrower. This team has shown us that they like overheads and deep throws, so our mark should have their hands up a little bit higher than against typical throwers. When marking a right-handed thrower, typically left arm is low to stop the low release flicks, as the higher release flick point is technically much more difficult, and a lot of college players will not have that release point. And the right arm is typically high to stop overhead hammers, scoobers, and high release backhands. Here, they score on another aggressive overhead for a hold. The score is now 5-9. Here, Joe gets a little too cute trying to go with a high release backhand against the cup to someone that's not Jamie. It looks like it's probably to IMAX. In general, I don't like long swing passes that skip the middle handler, as those passes tend to hang in the air for a long time and with little to gain in terms of vertical yardage. Most zone defenses will have a defender ready to close out on those long lateral passes. It's safer to use the middle handler to move it laterally in those situations. Their star handler does a really good job of challenging the mark just by using his lower body to step out and pivot to his backhand side. In this instance, I'd prefer Bobby to just shuffle his feet to his right. Remember, just because the thrower has to set a pivot foot doesn't mean that the mark does too. We can shuffle side to side and close that throwing window down with our body and our arms versus just using our arms. The break throw gets off to their lefty handler, who dishes a soft break pass up the gut for a score. They get another break, so the break count is now 1 break to their 5. The score is 5-10. They pull, and we have a nice clap catch to a centering pass. Here, we drop the centering pass, which is basically a big no-no in a close game. This is the worst kind of turnover, as it is unforced and produces a short field for the opposition. Here, their lefty handler does a simple step to his backhand side, and our mark, Danny, overreacts just a little bit. Look at how easily we can manipulate the mark, though, with just a simple step. Their thrower doesn't even have to change his grip to throw a fake, keeping both of his hands on the disc. Here, Nips gets the D. However, we have another turnover of the worst kind, unforced and providing a short field for our opponent. We talked recently about edge control at practice. Here, their thrower throws an outside-in flick which blades over the defender's head, in this case Logan, which is very difficult to spot and react to. Campbell scores and gains another break. The break count is now 1-6. Here, if you look closely, Adam touches his cleat, similar to how basketball players touch their sneakers. I want to point out that Jamie has a textbook backhand lunge. He opens up his chest upon releasing the disc, and you can see his follow through. Overall, it's a fast, polished throwing motion. That lunge will allow him to step around most marks. His backhand is up to provide balance. Here, Big Mac fakes. He needs his fakes to be more believable. We want to look like a thrower even if we're still developing our throwing skills. If I'm a defender on the other team, I'm clamping down now because it doesn't look like the person with the disc is comfortable throwing. Here, Jamie gets off a beautiful low release inside out flick break. Again, I want to point out the textbook lower body mechanics. There's a slight step forward and a lunge to the side, which allows Jamie to reach across his body and follow through. Here, Ian does a good job of faking with his upper body. The next step is to use his lower body, like how some of the Campbell players do, to manipulate the mark while also keeping your eyes up on the downfield targets. Here, Chin does a good job of getting open and jumping the score in. It looks like he may have been close to the goal line, and Chin makes sure that he's in the air while catching so that he can plant his feet firmly in the end zone as his first point of contact. Here we hold, and the score is 6-11. Here we pull and keep it in bounds. The pull has about 4 seconds of hang time. Campbell gets away with a low pass. Here we dump swing several times before finding one of our speedsters in the end zone against their handler. This is our second break of the game, and the break count is now 2-6. The score is 7-11. We pull again and keep it in bounds. Again, we have about 4 seconds of hang time. Nip's mark indicates that we are forcing flick. Dan is playing good face guarding defense against the short and cut option. Campbell looks immediately for their deep shot, and the huck doesn't hold its edge, fluttering over and going too far to the break side. Here, if the thrower dips his outside edge down slightly, the disc will flatten in its flight and probably be where he intended to throw it, right in the middle third of the end zone. Here, we want Gulker to be more on the force side of his person, as he's currently trailing the deep cutter. We can also see that Adam is aware looking to help on defense, as he peels off of his matchup during the initial portion of the throw, before realizing that the throw is hooking too far away from him to have a play on the disc. Nips catches a contested end cut. However, this cut would be more effective if Nips took a few more steps deep to make his defender respect the huck, and then cut underneath his defender once his defender's hips were turned toward the end zone. We still make this catch just by being fast and by boxing out. Again, Nips shows us that smooth no-pivot backhand. Logan gets off a nicely timed swing to Ben. Here, we have a nice give and go between Gulker and Dan. Logan comes back for the shotgun pass, looks for a continuation, doesn't see it, and pivots back toward the middle of the field. Good decision making, but we get lucky with the low throw due to inconsistent mechanics. Logan is trying to throw his backhand while still pivoting back around from flick to backhand. That's a more difficult throw that he will want to have at some point as a player, but for now, it's probably more important to establish a pivot foot and throw a set throw, or throw the no pivot backhand. Either option will have both feet in the ground, which should provide a stable base for the upper body mechanics. Here, we get off a hammer that has been pump faked twice, and then we dump swing for a score. We have too many bodies in the cutting lane directly in front of the thrower, even having two players run into one another. We need to hold our stack formation and allow handlers and the last cutter in the stack the ability to cut into that space. By having so many players clog that space, we inadvertently create a huge lane on the other side of the field, which Adam exploits. We break, and the break count is now 3-6. The score is 8-11. Here the pull is inbounds. Big Mac may want to stay slightly more underneath his matchup, as he has the speed to catch up if they throw a deep shot. Campbell gets off a nice huck for a score, and they hold. The score is now 8-12. Campbell is still throwing zone defense, and we hit a lot of dump swing and short quick passes to shred it. Here, Dan touches his hat right before throwing the assist. The Dirty Birds hold, and the score is now 9-12. This pull is inbounds. Campbell runs handler give and goes down the field before they mess up a dump reset. Here, the thrower doesn't turn his body to fully engage his dump, instead throwing a nearly blind backhand into space, which isn't near his intended target. This mistake right here is exactly why we will end up spending so much time on our dump sets this season. It might not be sexy, but it wins games. Off of the turnover, we dump and swing for the break. The break count is now 4-6, and the score is 10-12. Chin pulls inbounds with about 4.5 seconds worth of hang time. Again, this team likes to throw from higher release points, which we should know by now. They high release backhand to their star, who gains power position. Here, we want Big Mac to be denying the strike cut by positioning his body more up the field and in the short throwing lane directly in front of the thrower. Joe gets a nice poach block, which was set up by their offensive players being too close to one another. After the turnover, we run handler fast break give and goes before we end up throwing a turnover. Here, we don't want our lower body mechanics to be crossed over like this while throwing back the other way. This is the equivalent of those crossbody throws you sometimes see quarterbacks make. They might complete them on occasion, but it adds a level of difficulty that's unnecessary to the throw. A soft backhand to the flick side is okay here. However, we want Big Mac's right foot to be closer to his intended target than it is in this situation. This throw into traffic isn't completed. In addition, our entire stack needs to be pushed over more into the middle of the field. Here, they have an unforced turnover. We see that Joe's fakes are not realistic. Joe needs to use his lower body to move the mark. Nonetheless, we reset the disc. After the reset, we cram the disc up the cram hole for the break. The break count is now 5-6, and the score is 11-12. Here, Dan pulls in bounds and gets about 6 seconds worth of hang time. Campbell centers and looks immediately for their main guys, who are both cutting from the middle of the field. They break our mark, who needs to shift more around to stop the around backhand break. If we look at the mark, his feet are in line with his throwers. Ideally, Reven's feet should be shifted to his right so that the core of his body is stopping the around backhand, not just his right arm. We can see quickly that this player is not much of a thrower by his frantic head turns looking for an easy throw, and by the way he's not holding the disc in a confident neutral position or pivoting with good lower body technique. Jamie has good layout technique here, keeping his core parallel to the ground, which prevents him from exposing either of his shoulders upon impact with the ground. We want to land on our chest or stomach and slide when we bid. Jamie also does a great job of springing up to his feet to set the mark after he realizes that he didn't get the D, as well as reacting to the thrower's overhead throw fakes by bringing his hands up to challenge any overhead throws. Danny gets the layout block here and does the right thing by sprinting toward the end zone. Even though we don't fast break here, that sprint toward the end zone often puts opposing defenses into scramble mode, which can lead to matchup mistakes like the one that we made earlier in the game. Here, Joe needs to pivot and fake to move his mark. He keeps both hands on the disc and doesn't really use any lower body movement or lunges to challenge the containment area of his mark. We end up punting toward the end zone, which is fine to do in a high stall situation, as we want to play the field position game. However, if we pivot and challenge the mark more initially, we can probably reset the disc and get a new stall count. Jamie makes a nice contested grab here, going for an overhand catch. We want to avoid going underhanded when we're trying to high point a disc. We get the break, forcing Universe D. The break count is now 6-6, and the score is 12-all. We have a low pull here from Dan, which lands in bounds. Dan releases the disc too early and needs to wait until later in his arm swing motion to release this inside-out backhand pull, which will then have enough air underneath it to hang for several more seconds. Campbell gets a huck off to their star player against one of our rookies, who needs to be fighting to take away the force side. When Adam tries to come over to help but doesn't get the D, it allows his matchup to run free toward the end zone for the final score. Overall, this game had a lot of promising moments. First, as a team, we did a good job of quickly moving the disc to open players. That quick disc movement, even when not amounting to a ton of vertical yardage, can keep defenders out of position or provide opportunities for the defense to make a mistake, leading to a big play down the field. Second, we generally didn't struggle with our dumps. This is something that we will work on all season, from rookie to veteran, and we will manufacture ways to get into scoring position out of those dump passes. Throwing a dump pass is not a sign of failure. Some of the best teams in the country use their handlers and dump passes as a primary method of moving the disc with intention. For cleaning up as we move forward, we want the team to become aware of their mechanics as throwers. As a team, we need to have serviceable flicks and backhands, and handlers need to develop hucks and overheads as well. Everyone needs to be able to pivot with good lower body control. Jamie's pivoting is textbook, as his lunge allows him to create separation between him and his mark. Additionally, we want to throw our fakes to resemble our actual throws. Upon catching the disc, our neutral position, that is, when the disc is in our hands, needs to be something that is comfortable but also functional. We don't want a lot of unnecessary movement from our neutral position into our throwing motion, as it will lead to inconsistent throws and a longer release time. When throwing with a partner, also work on throwing believable fakes. Defensively, we want to remain on the force side of the person that we are guarding down the field, so that our body positioning and the direction of the mark can work in tandem to create defensive pressure. When we mark the thrower, we want to be on the balls of our feet and in general shifted over to the break side more than we currently are, so that the thrower cannot just step around us and break with an around throw. In terms of pulls, we want big hang time and we want our pulls to be in bounds. Anyone can become a serviceable puller with enough time dedicated to the craft. If you can prove to have valuable pulls on this team by keeping your pulls in bounds, landing them deep near the end zone, and with good hang time, you will find your way onto the field. We have a lot of positives to draw upon from last weekend. Keep throwing and running outside of practice. Lifting weights will also help you to add to your athletic base, but the number one skill that will help most beginning players is to just throw a lot. Get outside and throw in the wind. Begin to control your edges so that you can throw flat, outside in, and inside out. Throwing practice leads to inadvertent catching practice as well. As you saw in this game, if we can limit our unforced turnovers and prevent giving short fields to our opponent, we should be competitive in most of our games.